working for the weekend on 103.9 The Fox, Flint's Classic Rock Authority. And if you're working on a good Christmas gift for the classic rock lover in your life, boy, do I have a suggestion for you today. A very special guest on the phone, author of Goodnight, L.A., The Rise and Fall of Classic Rock, the untold story from inside the legendary recording studios. We are talking today with Kent Hartman. Kent, how are you today?
Pretty good, thank you.
Hey, great to have you on the show here. This is amazing. Bestseller, the Amazon Top 100, The Wrecking Crew, the inside story of rock and roll's best kept secret. Now, this was amazing. The Wrecking Crew, very cool how this dealt with like pop singles, AM radio, the 60s, but Goodnight, L.A., this is more up our alley here in the world of classic rock. This is truly, really a remarkable book, Kent. I'm just looking through the index here, and the amount of subject matter that you cover in this little thing is just amazing. But let's start with you. Give me a little bit of your background. Obviously, you're a music insider. Give me some of your background. How'd you start? How'd you break into it?
Well, I worked for years in L.A. in the music business in marketing and merchandising and different things for a whole bunch of well-known bands. You know, my clients were, Chicago, America, Foreigner, Little River Band, Lyle Lovett, Kenny Loggins, people like that.
And even just flipping through these photos, I mean, obviously an insider. You're backstage here at one of the Chicago stages, Robert Lamb here. So what is it like now, looking back, when you say the rise and fall of classic rock, to be able to say, hey, man, I was a part of that? That's got to be pretty satisfying to be able to look back and say that.
Yes. I mean, I was, and I'm still glad that I was there when all the music came out originally. And it gave me, maybe a better perspective in writing the book because I was there. I owned a record store in high school in Portland, Oregon, and so I was involved in it really early.
What I love is the dingy-looking buildings where a lot of this stuff, this great music came from, that you would never know it driving past it on the street. Give me one of the scariest recording studios to get to that you'd never know.
Well, here's an interesting one for you. I was in L.A. recently on a West Coast book tour, and so I decided to cruise back over down a few streets in Hollywood, and I drove by the Sound Factory, which is a well-known recording studio, and it existed in the 70s. Jackson Browne recorded there, James Taylor recorded there, Warren Zevon recorded there, Ron Stadd recorded there. It was a pretty hot place, and it's still there, and it looks exactly the same, except you would never in a million years know it was a recording studio. When you drive by, it's just this dumpy little building on a corner that has no signs on it and no windows, and when you drive by on the side of the building, there's the tiniest little plate that says Sound Factory, and it's about 2 inches by 1 inch, and that's all there is. And I laughed when I drove by because inside it's got fantastic equipment, but on the outside they actually want it to look bad because they don't want fans showing up.
They don't want the attention.
Yes, because back in the day, it may not be the case today because, the bands are getting kind of long in the tooth, but but back in the 70s, a lot of groupies were trying to find where they were, and, they just didn't want the bother.
More awesomeness from behind the scenes of the classic rock world. Goodnight, L.A., The Rise and Fall of Classic Rock, and my guest, Kent Hartman. More coming up.
103.9 The Fox.
Grand Trunk Railroad on 103.9 The Fox, Flint's Classic Rock Authority. As we get you home here with the Punch-Out Party, I do have some winning on the way in just a bit. Alexander the Geek is here, and maybe we're going to play a game. I don't know what we're going to play. We're going to play something.
Yeah?
Okay?
Okay.
All right, just saying. All right. In the meantime, Kent Hartman is on the line. He wrote this awesome book, Goodnight, L.A., The Rise and Fall of Classic Rock. There's a really cool stories behind the scenes in those recording studios out there in L.A. And, Kent, when you're working with, say, for example, like the Eagles and the Hotel California album, when you're working on a project like that and you're looking at it from behind the scenes, do you realize that it's legendary when it's coming together, or does it not happen until after the fact?
I've had that conversation with many of these classic rock folks, and very rarely have they ever said to me that they knew when they were laying it down it would be some sort of a classic. Now, a lot of times they knew it was some pretty good work, and in case of Hotel California, the band felt like it was their best work yet.
Okay.
But that's as far as their minds went. They weren't thinking, this is a number one, or this is going to sell 10 million copies. You never know, because I mentioned Warren Zevon earlier. You know, it was his second album, Excitable Boy, that had Werewolves of London on it, for example.
Yep.
And his first album had tanked, and he thought it was going to be a hit, and it didn't sell at all. And then when they put out Excitable Boy, that album, Werewolves of London was just a cartoonish throw-in song. They weren't even going to release that as a single, and the record label did that, and it infuriated Warren Zevon. He did not want that to come out as his single. He thought it was the worst song on the album. So there you go. They never really do know what's going to be a hit.
So here's a question. Were there any songs, maybe not an album specifically, but a certain song that when it was coming down, like you said, maybe they did have that feeling like this is going to be a hit? Were there any of those that jump out, or not really?
Well, I'm trying to think here. Yes, I think, you know, in terms of in the studio, like with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, when they did the Damn the Torpedoes album in '79, you know, like Refugee, I think, stood out to them, and they thought, you know, this has got some promise. This could be a hit.
So, of the acts that you actually sat down with these in-depth interviews, you've interviewed with them recently, and I'm guessing also back in the day. Has anything changed in the minds of like a Rick Springfield or a Jimmy Buffett over time as far as the music industry?
Well, I think here's the thing that might surprise a lot of folks that listen to these records, and it always surprises me because, you know, I've worked in the business, but I'm still a fan at heart too, just like everybody else.
Sure.
And I, you know, listen to stations just like yours, and so, but you know, most of the time when you get to know these folks or talk with them, they couldn't be nicer, and they couldn't be more forthcoming. And I honestly, in interviewing everybody for the book and folks that I already know, I mean, I can't even name one jerk among them.
That's awesome.
So they're great. Like to this very day, I mean, I'm friends with the guys in Chicago. I mean, whenever they come to town, I hang out with them, and it's embarrassing for me because they know that I'm an author now, and that, you know, I've done okay with it, and so they actually treat me more like royalty and than I do them, and it's embarrassing.
That's got to be pretty cool, though. So let me ask you this. When you knew that you were dealing with classic rock for this particular book, Goodnight, L.A., The Rise and Fall of Classic Rock, who did you instantly say to yourself, man, I haven't talked to them in a while, I'm going to really have to sit down and talk to who? Well,
the one person I really wanted to talk to for this book was actually Jim Messina from Loggins and Messina.
What was it about Jim that really made you say, I got to talk to him?
Well, I never knew him. I knew Kenny Loggins because he used to be my client. So,
okay.
And they hadn't been together for a number of years, and so I got Kenny's view on things. But I always wanted to see what Jim had to say because he's, at least today, the by far lesser known one of the two.
Oh, sure.
But it wasn't that way in the beginning, and so I spent the better part of 2 days just talking with Jim Messina, and learned everything you could want to know. And he was hired by Columbia Records to be a producer, and he had already been a member of the band Poco and Buffalo Springfield, and he wanted to get away from being in a band and wanted to produce. So Clive Davis at Columbia, like in 1971, I think it was, said, okay, we'll let you do that because you've been great on those albums. And so they assigned him Kenny Loggins. Kenny was an unknown singer-songwriter who didn't know how to do anything in the studio, and so they paired them up, and that first album of theirs was supposed to be a Kenny Loggins solo album, but their working relationship and the blend of their voices in the studio when Messina would harmonize with Kenny was so good that the label demanded that it come out as a Loggins and Messina album.
Alexander the Geek's eyes has been bugging out of his head this entire time. We've got more with Kent Hartman. Settle down. Wipe that drool up. Kent Hartman coming up.
It's Fenech on the Fox.
That's the boss, Bruce Springsteen, born in the USA. Glory Days on 103.9 The Fox, Flint's Classic Rock Authority. And speaking of Glory Days, we're talking about L.A., the amazing record-producing studios out there in L.A., some of the great albums that came from some of these dingy little studios. Alexander the Geek, put your tongue back in your mouth.
I can't help it. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, he's amazed by your work here, Kent. Now, with the artists, of course, they've got their stories, but you've also talked to some famed producers, Keith Olsen, Richard Dashit, of course, Butch Vig. What was something that maybe come out of those talks that you didn't know, something that you learned?
Well, you know, talking to the producers in depth was actually my favorite part of the book, because when you talk to stars, here's my rule of thumb in doing interviews, and maybe you found this too, but the bigger the star, the worse the stories.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Because they don't want to tell you the good stuff. They just
right.
And so, but the producers who also took less drugs,
right.
They have better memories, and they're more forthcoming, and they tend to be, I don't want to say that the musicians, there's lots of smart musicians, but the producers tended to be really sharp people. And so I got great stories from them. So, like, Butch Vig told me all about, creating Nevermind for Nirvana, and because I have that at the end of my book to show that was really the final thing that ended what we would think of as classic rock, when grunge came in. But then there's Butch Vig, who produced that and is a world-famous guy as the drummer of the band Garbage. But he was telling me that he loved classic rock, and he almost felt guilty coming out with all the grunge stuff because he could see that it was putting away the very people he loved to listen to.
Oh, that's got to be a catch-22.
Yeah.
So, classic rock, the essence of classic rock. Have you heard of Greta Van Fleet?
I don't know if I have. Who is that?
It's a band out of Frankenmuth. They've just come out, and people in the industry are saying that they're really able to capture that classic rock essence, and I didn't know if you'd heard of them or not. That's why I was just kind of curious. So
no, but you can bet I'm going to be playing them tonight.
I got to go check it out now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, a very, very cool band out of Frankenmuth, Michigan. So if you're ever in the area, not only can you go get some really good chicken up there and check out the Bavaria and all that stuff, you can check out Greta Van Fleet as well. So.
By the way, I don't want any of your listeners to say, hey, man, how come he's not talking about Bob Seger in the book? And the reason for that is that Bob Seger rarely ever recorded in L.A. He did record Hollywood Nights there.
Oh.
But most of the time he did it elsewhere, in New York or in Muscle Shoals or wherever. And so I love Bob Seger to death. I could play the song Main Street over and over and over for the rest of my life. And by the way, I heard it's about not Main Street there, but one street over or something like.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Look at you. I love this guy. Kent knows where the strip clubs are, Alex.
So anyway, he's not talked about in the book because the book is about the bands that were doing stuff in L.A.
So before you go, would you like to play one of our stupid contests here?
Well, I guess I'm just stupid enough to say yes.
What time is it? 4:20.
Do you think that smoking drugs is cool?
It's Just Bob's 420 contest.
All right, it's Just Bob's 420 contest. And as ridiculous as this is, I'm going to give you a copy of your own book. If you can tell me in 20 seconds 4 artists that you interview in this book. Go.
Chicago.
1.
REO Speedwagon.
2.
Pat Benatar.
3.
And the Cowsill.
You're a winner! Kent Hartman, congratulations. And again, great work here. Goodnight, L.A., the rise and fall of classic rock, the untold story from inside the legendary recording studios. Available today. Go pick it up. Kent, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
It's Fenech on the Fox.